Title, The Zebra Man, against the backdrop of that passage from Ecclesiastes and also from those two verses from the New Testament, the letter to the Philippians. During the summer of 1995, I think it was that summer, I'm not sure, somebody in Zimbabwe in the district of Masvingo, the guy I call the Zebra Man, said to me, when I asked him, why are you planting all these trees? Why do you have this nursery? He said to me, I want to show my grandchildren one day what a zebra looks like. I'm creating a forest so that the zebras can return to this region. Those words will stay with me until I check out, until I die. Because those were revelatory words to me, profound, especially in the context of a rural Shona man with his two kids, toddlers at that stage, a subsistence farmer in the southeastern region of Zimbabwe, Masvingo, a town about 3 hours drive north of the South African border, close to what was known as Lake Kyle, named after the region in Scotland where the original settler of that area came from, with the last name of McDougall, Tom McDougall, who settled there. Nowadays is called Lake Mutukiri. Also in the district of Masvingo is the very impressive, spectacular actually, Great Zimbabwe ruins. I don't know whom of you have seen pictures of it or know about it. It is an amazing, and I hate the word amazing because it's overused and overburdened, but to me it is, I want to use it in a good sense, amazing structure. It is dry stone walls that covers a very significant area, huge area, but what is most impressive of the dry stone walls are that they reach up to 36 feet in height, 36 feet tall dry stone walls. Now, those of you who've tried to construct a dry stone wall like I have, I battled to do anything above 2 feet to keep it upright. Those walls are 36 feet, over 36 feet high, some of them. Very impressive stone walls and a testimony to some advanced culture that had its capital there. And some of it, large structures, as if it is an exclamation point or a finger pointing upwards, raising your spirit, or perhaps a hand saying, wait a minute, pause, think where you are, think where you're going. I visited Masvingo at the invitation of Professor Ines Daniel, a theologian that was attached to the theological department of the University of South Africa, the biggest correspondence university for many decades in the world, and the first to implement that concept on such a large scale. We got talking, I don't know where I met him, but we got talking about ecology and the indigenous peoples of Zimbabwe and so forth. Ines Daniel was a remarkable figure. After the unilateral declaration of independence of Zimbabwe, of Rhodesia, under Prime Minister Ian Smith, that happened in 1967, there was a long war, a civil war. And eventually, in 1978, a peace agreement was signed, the Lancaster House Peace Agreement, which enabled Robert Mugabe to become the president. And I think most of you are familiar with him. During that time that the war broke out after the UDI, leading into the new Rhodesia or Zimbabwe, Ines Daniel did something remarkable. This theological professor embarked on a program where he combined into one movement with the aim of nature conservation the ex-guerrilla fighters, the veterans. He also took the indigenous churches with him into that movement, the indigenous churches, the churches that broke away from the Western churches and practiced a Christianity that was more culturally friendly to them. And he also incorporated in his movement the natural healers, the shamans that we know of Zimbabwe, of the Matabele and the Shona people. And he inspired this fellow, this zebra man, whose name I can't remember, and his last name even less, because it's probably a good Shona name that has a difficult pronunciation, more so than Hebrew names. He inspired this fellow to start a nursery. And the nursery had two main components. The first was a nursery to cultivate and distribute eucalyptus trees, where people would plant them in a plantation that was the woodlot, so that the indigenous species of slower growing wood could be preserved. In the rural area with no electricity, wood was the main source of energy. So he cultivated eucalyptus trees to save the indigenous species, and then he also cultivated the indigenous species to plant his forest, which he told me, I'm planting this forest so that my grandchildren can see what the zebra looks like. I want the zebra to return to my forest one day. That was remarkable because in all my life in Africa, that was the clearest indication of a long-term vision that I ever encountered. In the words of Professor John Mbiti, a very, very capable African theologian that was teaching at Burgdorf in Switzerland at the theological school there, he said, due to ancestral veneration, traditional African cultures tend to look at the present and orientate themselves into the past to satisfy and to keep comfortable the ancestors, which they regarded as being part of their lives. But this man did something remarkable, Zebra Man. He looked 3 generations into the future, and he committed himself to living and working to enable a future with his grandchildren in mind. That was what was foremost in his mind. What can I do to create a beautiful future for my children, and especially for my grandchildren? A paradigm shift, I think. Not business as usual, a new approach towards time and your place in reality. In the book of Ecclesiastes, what do we find there? The passage that we listened to, the few verses, follows that passage that everybody selects for a memorial service or a funeral. There is a time to do this and a time to do that. There is a time for this and a time for that. Opposites being paired and in a beautiful poetic form constructed and put together. In the thoughts of the author of Ecclesiastes, laying down the boundaries of our existence from which we cannot escape. We are born, we live with all these limitations, then we die. That's what we can do. And then almost on a deeper philosophical level, these verses follow, where he speaks about God giving us the ability to look at the past and also to think about the future. The past and the future comes together in his comment after listing all the boundaries and the opposites in the previous few verses. It says humans have the ability to look into the past and to conceptualize the future. Also a paradigm shift in the thinking of the time. Looking at the boundaries and say, this is not all there is for us. We can think about the future and conceptualize that. When you go across the green after the service, if you cross the road, what do you find on the other side of the road? A rock. That's true. Strangely, a rock in New England. I've been trying to make new beds on terraces, and I can tell you, rocks are present in abundance. Yes, there is a rock. What is on that rock? Has everybody sat on that bench or stood there and read what it says? Yeah, the Salem witch trials, and 3 women listed there. The names. Yeah, from Topsfield. That is a memorial to devastation. The witch trials, when greed and ignorance and superstition dictated what was happening. And the church was not only, like religious institutions often do, giving permission from supposedly higher level, from the gods, to what people want to do, to legitimize it. The church was not only that, the church was also the part of the enforcing and being an agent in killing people based on ignorance. There are theories about what happened, as it is called on that stone, the delusion of the witch trials. One explanation, I think I read it in the Witch Museum when our family visited that before, or when we were still living in Vermont, that says it was enzymes in the grain that the people ate, fermenting grain. And those enzymes in that fermentation process caused these delusions, like a drug. And that led to people saying these people are from the devil, they need to be removed from our presence. And I think the youngest, wasn't it an 18-month-old baby? A very young child. You can see them listed in the Witch Museum. I don't care so much for a lot of the other stuff in the Witch Museum, but that is very sadly interesting to read that. Also, another theory about why these women were killed said these were successful women and wealthy. So some men who were aware of their assets used this delusion thing to get rid of the women, to get access to their assets and grab that. If that is true, I don't know. But I think that, as I said, is a monument to violent destruction, enabled by ignorance and fed by greed. Such things always lead to destruction, often to violence, and it leaves behind often an apocalyptic scene of a pile of rubble, like we often see in the images of Syrian cities these days after several years of bombardment. That is one option, that is one possibility, if we continue as humanity with business as usual. But across this green, past this rock, yesterday, there was a scene of an abundance of life. A life-giving presence on Earth Day, where an alliance or an ensemble of different organizations came together and created something for me of immense beauty. The Historical Society, with the planting of a white oak, and the youth and the children gathered around it, honoring the old tree that was taken down last year. Then in our parking lot, different organizations in different ways promoting life and raising the awareness of the earth. And in our fellowship hall, the amazing whale-mobile. I don't know which of you saw that whale-mobile. It's a life-size blow-up blue whale. The kids enjoyed it. They were present there. It was a reminder, I think, of what can happen when people do what is listed here in Philippians. What is true? What is honorable? What is just? What is pure? What is pleasing? Commendable. And Paul says, think about these things. And then he says, what you see and hear from me, do that. When we take this as our guideline, what is true? And we do not make science our enemy, and we do not make ignorance a virtue. And we do not let greed dictate our lives. But we try to be a life-giving presence, especially with the eye on the future and the future of our grandchildren, like our zebra man, who planted the trees and did the back-breaking work of carrying water with a pail from a long distance away to water the seedlings that would provide the forest for his beloved zebras to return so that his grandchildren can experience and know that as well. When that happens, and God's people especially, or at least part of it, because I want to add this footnote here. When God's people are still part of it, we are fortunate. Because God's work and the work of God's kingdom will be done with or without the church. And the option is ours if we want to write ourselves out of that beautiful story. Because the work will be done by other institutions and individuals and organizations. But while we have the invitation still of people who do this beautiful work, let us embrace that, so that our parking lot and our meeting house and our other facilities may be places of life that do not point us to piles of rubble and destruction, but that are part of the monument to life. Like that stone structures that reaches over 36 feet into the air. A reminder of the wonder of cooperation, of working together, of discerning the signs of building those dry wall structures and leaving a legacy that endures and invokes wonder still today, so many centuries after that was built. When we are willing to listen to God's Spirit calling us to what is good and what is honorable and what is true, then ordinary people like Zebra Man, a rural subsistence farmer, becomes a visionary. Ordinary people become visionaries. Ordinary people can work wonders. Ordinary people will change the world and create a world where grandchildren and all life can flourish. Let us embrace that vision and set ourselves firmly on that path, working together to do what is right. May love guide us in that way. May we be courageous enough to obey God's Spirit. Amen.